Well, everyone, I want to welcome you to the first live stream of 2024. My name is Cyrus Jansen. We had an amazing year of growth here on YouTube in 2023, and I'm so excited to continue making videos about China, Ukraine, Russia, Israel. We have so many interesting geopolitical stories that are, happening every single day. And this is what we do here on this YouTube channel. And I'm so excited to have each and every one of you along for the ride. Now, the topic of today's live stream is going to be the US China trade war in 2024. This is actually a very interesting topic because every day in Western media, we are constantly hearing that we need to decouple from China. But what's interesting is that is one side of the equation. That is something that US politicians will often say. But on the flip side of that equation, we're actually seeing something very different in the real world. The United States and China trade relationship is worth $700 billion. Quite frankly, it's basically impossible for the US and China economies to decouple from themselves. And this past week here in Las Vegas, I was actually attending the Consumer Electronics Show. Now, this is the number one show for consumer electronics in the world. And I want to share with you a very interesting insight to kind of set the tone for this live stream. So, if you look at this tweet, this is what I said. This is what the US China relationship looks like in real life. I'm attending CES this week and I met with scores of Chinese companies and hundreds of Chinese entrepreneurs and investors, many of whom are making their first trip to the United States. While our politicians preach the US needs to decouple from China, the reality is completely different. The US and China make incredible partners, and everyone in this room tonight feels the same message. When the US and China work together, the whole world wins. Now, the video that you're seeing right now, this is actually a room. This is actually a restaurant in Las Vegas, and this was filled with over 300 Chinese entrepreneurs, businessmen and women, all who had flown into Las Vegas to attend this Consumer Electronics Show. It was an absolutely incredible show. It is an annual show that I go to every year because I'm interested in learning more about the world's best tech, but I'm also interested in seeing, this relationship between the US and China, because there are literally thousands and thousands of people flying over from China just to attend this event. Now, today's live stream is also going to be very important because I actually have a very special guest and also someone that I have collaborated with before, and his name is Jason Smith. Now, Jason is an amazing expat that lives in Beijing. He is the host of the Bridge podcast, which really does a great job in really showcasing what the real world is to China. If you follow Jason on TikTok, he has over 1 million followers there on TikTok. He has a growing Twitter handle and, again, an amazing podcast. So I'm so excited to kind of transition from this studio, and we're going to show you a recording, actually, that Jason and I did earlier a couple weeks ago, where we basically continue on this theme. We talk about the United States and China's trade relationship. Guys, this is going to be so much fun. Again, welcome to the first live stream of 2024. Enjoy this conversation with Jason and I about US-China trade. Let's jump in.
I'm Jason of the Bridge podcast, and this is Cyrus Jansen. All right, so I wanted to talk to you because I know you're an entrepreneur, and you you've actually invested in Starbucks, for example, which we're going to talk a little bit about. It's going to be a tiny sliver of what we talk about.
Sure.
And Starbucks is huge in China with 6,500 branches right now.
Yeah.
With something like 2,000, 3,000 coming by 2027. Is that right?
Exactly. That's right. Absolutely.
So American business, big business is big on China. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Jason, I think what's really interesting is we hear, constantly in Western media is, we need to decouple from China. We need to de-risk from China. We need to, and it's interesting, especially with the very far right-wing politicians and those that are, extremely hawkish. There are these China hawks that are very aggressive towards China. They have a very just completely irrational view of the world that we live in. And just the fact that, for example, as you know, the United States and China relationship is worth over $700 billion. I'm talking the trade relationship specifically. And there is so much business being done between the United States and China it would be absolutely impossible for the United States and China to decouple. Now, there's
Mm.
certainly some things of de-risking, if you will. You've kind of seen that terminology change. You know, in the beginning, it always used to be we need to decouple, we need to separate everything we can from China. But realistically, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, we've been building this relationship with China for 50 years, and to throw it all away, you know, for what? One of the very first YouTube videos I ever made was just talking about how, you know, you look at the Dow 30 and all of these companies have supply chains tied back to China, or China is a huge market for them. And so, you know, we've spent 50 years building this relationship. You know, the United States and China are going to be tied at the hip for the foreseeable future.
Well, I mean, beyond that, even in de-risking, a lot of, for example, in the last year, Mexico emerged as the US largest trading partner under the new version of NAFTA. But actually, a lot of the goods that China was already delivering to the United States as unfinished goods are now going into Mexico, becoming finished goods, and then moving into the United States. So even then, when we're de-risking, the supply chain, the logistics chain globally is just moving around. But this
Exactly.
still China and the United States are integral parts of what's going on in terms of global supply chains and global logistics. I also read recently that pharmaceutical goods for the United States are almost exclusively made in China. So if there was a de-risking or a full decoupling, which is not imaginable anymore, thank goodness some reason prevailed, the
Right.
United States suddenly would just run out of every kind of drug imaginable, which is, ridiculous and couldn't happen in reality.
It couldn't, and I think it's something like Pfizer. I think Pfizer's had an incredible run in China. I'm thinking something like 40 years. It's something like that. It's a very could potentially even be longer. I know don't know the exact dates, but they've been in China for decades, many decades. They have an incredible reach, you know, all throughout China. But again, I mean, tremendous amount of factories, tremendous amount of business. I mean, you can just imagine a U.S. listed company like that with this amount of reach in China. I mean, they've got tons of American executives on the ground in China. I mean, we're talking local teams of probably tens of thousands of local Chinese working for Pfizer in order to make that industry happen. And yeah, Jason, you're exactly right. I mean, it's not feasible. It's not going to happen. This, a complete decoupling from China. It's completely counterintuitive to, you know, the future of America's own economy.
On my phone, which I order food at home a lot here in China, it's much more convenient than the United States. The United States still has a little bit of catching up to do on this.
Hmm.
But if I open my phone, I open Alama, like the top 10 restaurant choices that appear, which is like
Right.
Grubhub China for people who don't know, are like McDonald's, Burger King, KFC, even Taco Bell now here in Beijing, which is also Yum Brands, which controls KFC. I think
Right.
there's something like 40,000 locations that Yum Brands has of various different kinds of outlets. They own Pizza Hut, KFC, Taco Bell, and other brands that are starting to open up. And Popeyes is now coming back apparently
Right.
into
Right.
China.
I've heard that.
I wanted to just go through a list of some of
Sure.
the things that most people know, but I think they need to be reminded of that exist
Right.
here in China. So we have two Disneylands.
Right.
We have one in Shanghai, one in Hong Kong. So Disneyland is gigantic, and there are Disney stores in every major city in
Right.
China, which are amazing. I'm a giant kid, so I go to Lego stores, I go to Disney stores. I
Yeah.
have all kinds of ridiculous things that adults probably shouldn't have, like Star Wars toys. But we have a Universal Studio now here in Beijing.
Right.
I haven't been to, but everyone I know has been. I'm just lazy. Hilton is growing, so I
Right.
think it's going to be growing to 730 branches by 2027. Also,
Right.
and we have eight. China is a member of APEC. The U.S. is a member of APEC. We just had a huge meeting in San Francisco not too long ago, and
Right.
I'm on here on the ground. So I went ahead and I went to the grocery store near my house. This is just a
Mhm.
random grocery store, Walmart, by my home, and I wanted to see, just based on brand recognition with my eyes. I wanted to see what American brands I could find, and I found them in about 20 minutes. And I took a
Right.
bunch of pictures and checked out where they are. So I found Oreo cookies, which is headquarters Chicago. I
Right.
found Snickers, Mars, Virginia. I saw Gillette, and I knew, okay, this is something I always got back at home. Cincinnati, Ohio. I
Right.
saw what is it? Schick, which is a Gillette's competitor, Connecticut. I saw Anheuser-Busch, which is located in St. Louis, Missouri. Procter and Gamble owns VS, Vidal Sassoon. I don't use their product. Sorry, I think it's more of a lady product.
Right.
Cincinnati, Ohio. Safeguard, Hormel Foods, Smithfield Foods, Hormel, Spam Hot Wheels, Lay's. I just wanted to just go through a little bit faster.
Yeah.
Tide, Colgate, Clear Clean, Listerine, Skippy. My brother loves Skippy, by the way. Raid, if you got a cockroach problem, I guess. Olay, French's Mustard, which is actually Baltimore, not France. McCormick owns a lot of the seasonings, which are here in China from
Right.
Maryland. And it goes on and on and on and on. Morton Salt, various kinds of toothbrushes, just tons and tons of stuff that we can find at our local grocery. And I didn't even get through everything here. And this is just what I immediately recognized, immediately saw. This is not an exhaustive list of all of the American brands that are located in a regular grocery store here in China. So there's an enormous amount of money to be made for American brands, for the people who work in these factories, for the people who are invested in these companies selling these products in China. China is, in my opinion, not in my opinion, the largest middle class in the world. The United
Right.
States is population 350 million. So what is that? 200 million maybe in the middle class. China is a population of 1.4 billion people, and that's a half a billion people in their middle class. So we're talking
Right.
about 500 million people buying Skippy. So
Right.
maybe not all buying Skippy, but you know what I mean. So like
Right. Right.
the idea that that congresspersons would try to de-risk, decouple from China, it only hurts U.S. businesses.
It does. Jason, I think an important point to really point out to the viewers and those listening to this podcast as well is we have a very big disconnect to reality of what's really happening in China, and that disconnect is just so large on the media here in the United States. It is actually truly remarkable when you turn on a Fox News and you actually listen to their comments about China, because it's not even, it's so far removed from reality that it's to the point of that they must be going out of their way to be making things up that are just complete nonsense. And a great example with this would be Gordon Chang, who is obviously a very, very prominent anti-China hawk. He is constantly on radio and television, making, I would say, 3 to 5 appearances a week minimum, somewhere in the United States, as this great China expert. Gordon Chang, very famous for writing The Coming Collapse of China, which was published in 2001. Obviously, we're almost a couple weeks away from the new year here, so almost 23 years of being wrong on that prediction.
In
And
2011, he said he was only off by 1 year. So
yeah, exactly. So he's had just a history. He's kind of like what is it, the Nostradamus, who's always predicting like the end of the world and all of this stuff. So, but what's interesting, even with him, is he said, it's so dangerous that we're going to have electric vehicles made by China navigating the streets of California, because once the war starts, China is going to be able to flip a switch, and all of these EV cars are going to be used as battering rams and be killing innocent civilians in American streets. And it's like, wow, like that's just so far removed from reality. I mean, that's just hyperbole. It's just really nonsense. I don't think a rational person or anybody that's really educated, anybody that's been to China, any businessman, no one is looking at this with any credibility. We simply can write him off because we've been there, we're experienced, we know that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of uneducated people that really, quite frankly, don't know anything about the outside world. So they're very gullible. And we have a very large population inside this country that will listen to the Fox News and be completely brainwashed and think China is just some dystopian hellhole that is just so far removed from what really is there. And, it's interesting, Jason. As you know, I used to live in China for 10 years. I've come back to the United States. I do enjoy being here because I really do find my role very important here. I always want to improve U.S.-China relations. I think it's important to live in one of those two locations. You're on the ground in Beijing. I'm here in the United States. But it's great because every day I talk to people. I tell them about my YouTube channel I run. I tell them about the work that I do in China. And, when I get a chance to connect with people one-on-one, it's always, a much different experience, because it's like, oh, wow, you're an American that actually lived there for 10 years. Like, you actually know what it's really like over there. Like, tell me, what is it really like? And so yeah, again, I think that's the big message I really want to get through, is that what our politicians, preach or that they do, it's really become a sad point in the United States, where we just try to say the most ridiculous things on the TV in order to get more TV time, in order to sell our votes. And I mean, it's just BS. I mean, that's just, at the end of the day, that's all it is. And it's just a waste of time, for a lot of people, because they don't, again, I always say, look at the business leaders. These are the guys that move the needle, that really make the decisions. And again, it's why you're seeing companies like Disney and Universal and Colgate and Procter and Gamble and Pfizer and Hilton and McDonald's and all of these companies. You open up a Starbucks. I mean, for for over a decade, the growth was not coming. Starbucks has been a very lucrative stock to hold for, a long time. And the main reason for that is China. And let's be honest, I mean, if you've been an Apple shareholder, that's because of China. I mean, it has increased so much and become the most valuable company in the world because of China. Number one, you're being able to produce your world-class phones in one of the best destinations in the world. You're getting it produced, high quality labor and high quality efficient products produced in China. And then not only that, you export them to the United States and then re-import them right back to China and sell them to that massive 5 to 600 million person deep middle class, which you talked about, Jason. So there, you're kind of double dipping. You're getting to manufacture in China for the cheaper price, but then you're also being able to turn that around and sell it at a full retail price to the Chinese consumer, who are happy to buy that as well, because they are rising. The middle class is rising in China. People are becoming more wealthy, etc.
Well, I was really surprised after the Huawei Mate 60 Pro came out. I thought a lot of people were going to be trying to switch to this phone, but I immediately went to an Apple store like a couple days later. Even though a lot of the Huawei stores were packed right after the initial launch,
Right.
Apple stores had lines around the block.
Yeah.
Literally, I recorded it and put it on Twitter. I
Yeah.
think when we're talking about TV in the United States, it really is an older generational habit of watching television. If
Right.
you look at the statistics, trust in TV and print media in the United States is at all-time lows, and a lot of people are getting their media from, diffused sources like TikTok and Twitter and Reddit and all of these other social media platforms, because, major media outlets actually have migrated to these platforms as well. Plus, you
Right.
have people on the ground reporting what's going on. So I don't even think my mom watches TV anymore. She watches TV via the internet or something.
Right.
So she's in her 70s. So I
Right.
think like the whole concept of what is, Fox News saying when we go on there, or MSNBC or whatever, a lot of it's ludicrous because they just need to be as sensational as possible, because they're selling the same products that we're buying here, that I'm buying here in China, that are
Yeah.
manufactured in the United States. And I gotta say, a lot of people are like, oh, in China they're so nationalist that there'll be like boycotts against U.S. products. Generally not.
Yeah.
I have to say,
Agreed.
like, really, like people who like Snickers bars are just going to keep buying Snickers bars pretty much no matter what. And I've
Right.
never seen like KFC struggling because there was any kind of boycott or anything. And Taco Bell's growing. A few years ago it was one Taco Bell in Shanghai. Now Yum Foods is starting to roll them out. Thank goodness. I think there's like 5 here in Beijing now.
Okay. Yeah.
When I put it into Didi the other day to go to the one location I thought there was, I suddenly had a suite of options for where I could go to get Taco Bell. So
Yeah.
like US brands are growing rapidly. And Disney, I think Disney's a really good example because parents love Disney. If you
Yeah.
see a child on the streets of Beijing or Shanghai or Chongqing, any major city, they're guaranteed, if they have a child with them, that kid is wearing a Disney backpack. That
Right.
backpack is something to do with one of the Disney movies, whether it is a Marvel part of the,
Right.
Disney, whether it's like princess stuff. All of it is, Disney is so popular, and they're doing enormous amounts of business here in China. Disneyland is opening a Zootopia branch here in the Shanghai branch. So I'm an adult. I'll bring my wife. We'll go. We don't have kids, but I
Yeah.
want that. If there was a Star Wars theme here, Star Wars is not as popular in China. That's one thing didn't
Right.
really ever catch on. But if there was a Star Wars part of the Disney theme park, I would already have been there.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
got to go to Disney before it opened in one of the soft openings. It's an amazing park. It was really slammed for the first year or two, and now
Yeah.
it's just business as usual. And they're doing money. They're making money hands over fist. There are lines at Disney every day. So I think, yeah, this concept by these, like the people that you're talking about, radical congressmen or like radically right wing, or even left. Some people on the left too. This is not just a right left wing thing.
No.
There's kind of an anti-China sentiment amongst people who know very little about China. I got to say about Gordon, who we were talking about before, all due respect, he hasn't been in China in 20 years.
Right.
So what he knows about China is, I mean, you were here just a few years ago. China in 2016 and China in 2008 was a different planet. It's a completely
Yeah.
different universe. And now 2023, there are robots everywhere. Every hotel I've stayed in, and I stay in a hotel like twice a month for a few days, has
Right.
robots that bring your food to your door. Or like there are robots in every mall on every floor that tell you where to go, that can move around now. I mean, like, China is constantly advancing to the next level technologically, and you can see it in real time. A lot of the malls, because real estate was a problem for business real estate. I'm not talking about the housing market, completely separate issue. But
Right.
just like in the United States, a lot of the business real estate had plummeted in value because people were working from home.
Right.
So service industries came into malls and took up a lot of that square footage. Now you have a lot more arcades, you have a lot more like laser tag, you have a lot more like ice rinks, you have physical entertainment that you can't just do at home.
Right.
So, you go to like the mall, there's VR places in every major mall that you go to now.
Nice. Very
So
cool.
yeah, it is very cool. And China is just constantly breakneck, like trying every new fad that came out. I went to CIIE in Shanghai, and there are things that okay, when I was a kid, and I guess still now, parents are worried about their kids getting fat or whatever, because they're just playing on a little joystick. But now they have video games. You run around, and the ceiling, floor, and walls are completely interactive, and you're in that world, literally running around in like a
Right.
warehouse environment. So like,
Nice.
it's just, I saw this at SIFTUS in Beijing too. I can't wait until this becomes ubiquitous all over the world. It always
Yeah.
has to start somewhere. Do you see this in the States, this kind of tech?
I mean, we have a lot of tech like that as well. I mean, I would say we've started to see some of the robots in restaurants delivering some food and things like that. I mean, it's certainly not at the level of China, and it was really good for me this summer. I was able to go back to China for a week for business. So I was back in June 23, so earlier this summer. And, because it's so important when you're discussing China. I mean, you got to be living there or visiting there. You've got to be in touch with what's going on because, as a year in China, I mean, the country changes so fast and, the technology improves so much. And I think you brought up a couple good points, though, Jason. I just want to hit on real quick again, is you mentioned the fact that the Huawei phone was a massive success in China, the Mate 60, which it was. It was a great, financial success. It was, it was certainly a lot for a lot of Chinese. It was a source of national pride. I want to buy the Huawei phone. It's made in China, proud to be Chinese, made in China. But that being said, again, you have a middle class of 5, 6, 700 million people. There's plenty for many brands to exist. So I know that and the reality is that the Huawei stores are going to be packed, the Apple stores, the Samsung, the Xiaomi, they're all going to be packed because there's enough customers to go around, and everybody's going to have a smartphone. So, but I totally agree with you. Is that's one of the biggest things that I always mention is, when everyone, my most common question that I get is, what's it like being an American in China? And I say, to be honest, it's amazing because Chinese people are some of the most friendly people that you'll ever meet. They are fascinated when tell them that you're from America. They always want to talk about the country. They always want to know where you're from, what's life like in America. But obviously Chinese have a tremendous respect for the United States. And I think that's a really important thing because there is no animosity. And I think, for example, I would say that a lot of Chinese would probably say, I'm not a huge fan of your government. I don't really like the American government, but as far as the country, the land, the people, the culture, certainly people like American people like yourself, yeah, I'm a fan, or American food or products or things like that. And, it is a great testament to America, how many amazing companies that we have and the products that we're able to do and the marketing that we're able to do and the global reach. You think of something like Coca-Cola, for example. I mean, it's literally in every country, it's everywhere,
Yeah.
right? You go to some tiny village in Africa. I mean, there's Coke there. I mean, if there's going to be one foreign drink, it's going to be a Coke. I mean, their reach is incredible. Obviously, very big in China as well. But it is awesome because there's a lot of. I mean, when I was back, I got so many people coming up to talk to me, asking where I'm from, and every single time. And that's the entire 10 years I was in China, and every time I visited thereafter, everyone always has a very positive image of America. And I think that's really important. It's just something I want people to really understand. And I think what I always try to tell people on this side as well is, what's life like in China? I mean, it's actually pretty similar to what we're doing here. It's not that much different, right? Right now in China, there's people at a Starbucks, talking about their, the latest movie they saw. There's a grandma, walking her son home, or her grandson home from school, and there's a granddad, playing, doing some activities with their kids. I mean, they're, and kind of in life, we all want this, a similar thing. We always want to, live a better life and have a family time, things like that. So, our countries are very similar in many ways. And I think it's really that people to people diplomacy that's really important. When you actually connect with Chinese people here in America, people don't have a problem. I mean, America's an immigrant country. We welcome people from all over the world, and it's the diversity here that is a great thing. And I think China is very similar in that, is that they are very welcoming to foreigners around the world. And, I mean, I think one of the interesting things, I was talking to an older man when I was in Shanghai this year, and he just said, thanks for coming to China, like right now. Like, he came in June 23, thanks for coming, when it just opened, because that, the international tourists were able to come in on March 15th, as when it reopened this year. So as soon as that opened, I said, all right, I'm going back. And a couple months later was able to come out. And so, yeah, it was a great experience. And you know what? I mean, it's just so important, that more people understand what China is really like and how important this relationship between U.S. and China really is, Jason.
I completely agree. I was also thinking about, we were talking about amazing things that the United States has that Chinese people appreciate. And I have to say that one of the key things, maybe the major thing, is the university system.
Mm,
China has unbelievably better universities now than it did 20, 30 years ago. And they're
correct.
actually ranking world globally, but that's not the point that I'm trying to make. So that's not where I'm going. But, there's not a Chinese person who wants to go to college that would turn down an offer at Harvard. So
Right.
like, U.S. university system, Berkeley, Harvard, UCLA, USC, all the, Yale, Princeton, they are internationally recognized brands that Chinese people would love to attend these universities.
Right.
So, that's one thing that I'm hopeful in terms of people to people exchanges, because, we do have leaders who have maybe been to China once or have never been to China, who say bizarre things about China and misconstrue what life is really like here. So I'm
Right.
really hopeful that more Chinese people will go back to the US to attend universities there, and we can have people to people exchange, because much better than, 10 or 20 diplomats going back and forth between countries having a dialogue would be tens of thousands of people living in one another's country. Now, I looked at the
Absolutely.
data for 2018. There were 72,000 Americans living in China. I don't know what the number is today, but I imagine it's about half. So
Right.
I would love to see more Americans come here to China to study at universities, also to get jobs. Even, you're 22 years old, you just got out of college, you want to take a year off or just do something different, come and teach English over here.
Right.
There's definitely room for English teachers who to come to China, live in the city of your choice, and
Right.
get that firsthand experience. Maybe you make some business contacts. Maybe it changes your life. Maybe you just go home after a year and you can tell people what life in China is really like. But
Yeah.
I think, one of the things that makes that difficult is there's a warning on the State Department's website saying all of these things about China, which are patently not true. Like, oh, if
Right.
you go to China, leave your computers at home. What? I'm sorry. Don't do
Right.
that. There's no reason to do that. No one's going to like plug something in your computer when you arrive in China and make sure that you don't have like Facebook or some bizarre thing that you
Right.
be anticipating. And for the parents that are out there who are thinking about letting their child come here for school, come here for university, it's just like America, really. And only it's more affordable. Everything here with the purchasing power parity of Chinese economy, you can afford to live, you can afford to go to university, you can afford to have a good time actually out on the town, and you probably graduate with far less debt than if you attend a US university.
No,
Think about
absolutely.
this for Americans, because I love the idea of people to people exchanges, people coming out here to China to see what life is like for themselves firsthand, and not just for a week or two on a vacation or a exploration trip, but like actually coming out and living here for a year or a few years. Coming to
Yeah.
university in China is going to give you the ability to speak Chinese. All the
Yeah.
people who I know who speak fluent Chinese learned at Chinese universities. You're going to make contacts. The two largest economies in the world are the United States and China. If you are an American with Chinese contacts and the ability to speak Mandarin, you are perfectly placed in the modern world to be successful. The rest is really
Absolutely.
up to you. You got all the tools that you need. So I would
Right.
love to see more Chinese people come to the United States. I would love more people from the United States to come to China, so that we can kind of diffuse the tensions that have been boiling up for the last few years unnecessarily.
Yeah. No, Jason, I think we're seeing a big progress. I think what's really interesting is how important that meeting was between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden at the APEC meeting in November. It was really a great thing because, number one, I think for the China Hawks, they really struggled with that because, for example, they had just preached constantly how, we need to decouple, we need to decouple. And then all of a sudden you see Xi Jinping come, Joe Biden and him have a great meeting. All of a sudden there's a room full of business executives who
Cheering.
are cheering for him. But not only that, I mean, they're paying $2,000 a plate in order to have dinner with Xi Jinping in the room, and you're paying $40,000 a plate in order to sit at his table. And of
Wow.
course, you've got all of the big executives, the Elon Musks and the CEO from, Chase and, Disney CEO. I mean, all of these guys are there. And it is just, it is symbolic. I mean, I know, for example, the very far right-wing extremists are saying, oh, these executives are kissing up to China. And it's like, no, it's just, again, it's just about doing business. Again, you have the president of China who's arrived on American soil, very rare thing that doesn't happen that often. Yeah, and you have a company like Disney that, oh, by the way, Shanghai Disneyland, for example, that's 51% owned by China's government. A lot of people don't. A lot of people don't even know that. Is that Disney doesn't even have the majority share in that. It's actually a joint venture with the communist government, and so they have a vested interest in obviously Disney doing well, and it's very and obviously Disney's willing to do that deal because it's fine. I mean, it's you're wanting to tap into that market, and like you said, there's Shanghai Disney stores everywhere. They're selling the backpacks, they're selling the gear, the movies. It's very popular concept. And similar thing to even the sports world, like NBA, right? NBA, 20% of the revenue comes directly from China. They understand the importance of having that good relationship. And, why wouldn't you want to have a good relationship with China? Like you said, number one and two economies in the world, US and China, hence why there's so much synergies there. And I think what's also we've seen, Jason, is a nice shift. I remember a couple years ago when Scott Morrison was the Prime Minister of Australia. Australia and China relations were at an all-time low. It was basically dead frozen. There was no signs of really any progress being made. But you know what? Time does heal wounds because all of a sudden we've got a new prime minister in Australia. He, meets with Xi Jinping. All of a sudden it's like, let's reopen those, let's reestablish those trade lines. Let's do this. So Australia, they get their relationship back on track. You look at the United States, okay, we've had a bit of a thawing out and a bit of more of a normalization as of late. So, there's, again, it kind of goes back to that. What I always like to say is we need to take what the politicians say with a grain of salt, knowing that most times, if not all times, they have an ulterior motive. It is, how can I leverage this in order to get more eyeballs watching me and in order for me to get more press time, that way I can leverage it for more votes. Probably no greater example was, I think it was Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, who had said, I remember he got on national television. He said, our Team USA Olympians should not be going to Beijing for the Winter Olympics in 2022 because the Chinese government's going to steal their DNA. And from that DNA, they're going to make these superhumans that are going to, become these military, combat warriors. And it's like,
Did he really say that?
he really said that like that. And so he's like, I would, he basically wanted to cancel Team USA. Like we should completely forego the Olympics in Beijing. The reason why is national security risk. They're going to take the DNA from our athletes because they're superior. And so you can imagine, like, all of a sudden, he gets on television and people are like, oh, wow, look at this guy. But, so he gets a lot of press. He gets a lot of TV time. It's almost like say the most ridiculous thing you can out loud. And then, of course, you're going to be in the media, right? People are going to like, wait, did you hear what China's stealing Team USA's DNA? No, they're not. They're not. It's ridiculous. It's just complete nonsense. But, that's kind of the world that we live in now. But like you said earlier, this is why trust in television media is as an all-time low. And it's why, I think I saw the graphic the other day, it was the 30 years and under, most of their news is coming from TikTok, or an Instagram. It's not coming from, if you're below the age of 30, you're not turning on CNN to catch up with the latest news. That those are quickly dying out. And that's why social media is so important. I mean, I know that you have over 1 million followers on TikTok. I know that, for myself, growing a YouTube channel. I mean, there's a reason why our channels are growing is because people are seeking that alternative information. And, we've seen that. I don't think there's been a greater example. It's getting a little off topic here, but just touch on it briefly, is like Israel-Palestine. There's a reason why this has been such a big story around the world, and it's just because of social media. And that's just where I wanted to go with that. Is just the power of social media.
Yeah, the power of social media is actually amazing. The thing you said about Tom Cotton, it sounds like one of those like the aliens made the pyramids kind of level conspiracy theories to me. So I'm not
Yeah,
going
it's
to go
crazy.
there. I
It's
thought,
crazy.
yeah, in terms of the thawing of relations vis-a-vis the United States and China, I think it's really interesting. Before Blinken came, right? Before Yellen came, before Gavin Newsom came, before Xi Jinping went to San Francisco, Tim Cook came to China. Elon
Yeah.
Musk came to China. U.S. business leaders, CEOs of major corporations came to Beijing, came to Shanghai, had meetings with the central government of China, they were trying to thaw relations because they knew how important the Sino-U.S. Business environment is, better than our own senators, better than our politicians in the United States. So the sane people who actually know what's at stake came over to China to make peace, and then Blinken came over, and then Yellen came over. So it's like the paving the way for making peace actually came from the business community in the
Absolutely.
United States. I wanted to talk a little bit about Tesla. Now, you
Yeah.
were mentioning, China's a huge market. There's room for Apple, there's room for Huawei, there's room for Xiaomi and Samsung, but the same is true of the EV market. Firstly,
Right.
fact, more than half of all EV sales, despite the fact that media is talking about Europe all of the time, are in China.
Right.
China buys more than half of all electronic vehicles every year. And so that's the reason Tesla is here. That's the reason Elon Musk is here.
Right.
And even if they can only get 5 or 10 or 20% of the market, that is gigantic. And
Yeah,
when I'm
absolutely.
walking around on the streets of Beijing, I see Teslas all the time. Of course, I see BYD also, but I see
Yeah.
Teslas everywhere. And Chinese people are proud to have Teslas. I know a lot of Tesla owners personally, and the
Yeah.
inside of a Tesla is a really nice vehicle. It is an amazing
It's
experience.
awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I drive a Tesla. I love it. I mean, it's a great car, and I think what the interesting story about that, Jason, is actually China was so brilliant. That's probably one of the smartest decisions that China's government ever made. Is that what happened is they actually what they look back is about 20 years ago, really before EVs were even a thing. They were looking at how do we compete in the car market, right? And they started looking at Germany and Japan. And Germany and Japan are these two legacy automakers. Obviously, they absolutely dominate in the traditional engines and gas powered cars. So all of a sudden they're like, well, how do we compete with that? How are we going to compete with Japan and Germany? We can't. It's not. They're too far advanced. But where the playing field is level is EVs, because no one, and let's go back. Let's go back to 2000. In 2000, no one had a clear advantage. So what China did is they said, let's go ahead and let's double down all our efforts on really becoming the best EV maker. Let's be the leader in electric vehicles, because we do believe that there's a opportunity for this, and we do believe that there's a future. Now, the most brilliant strategy is that they decided to give subsidies out. Now, this is common in China. Obviously, if there is a certain initiative or a certain thing that the government wants to promote, the government can provide subsidies, or they can certainly promote that. Another example would be AI, for example. If you are a business that wants to open up and do AI, you can go to certain cities in China and have preferable tax rates because, hey, you're going to be going to this, let's say, third or fourth tier city. You're going to be providing jobs. You're going to be working in AI, which is an industry that we want to develop. Hence why we will give you subsidies. We will give you tax advantages. We are going to incentivize you to do that. Now, what they decided to do is they said, if you're going to be in the EV space, we're going to give you subsidies, but we're not limiting those subsidies to local companies. Foreign companies can also come. And who
Mm,
was the first one to come? Tesla.
mm,
Tesla came, Elon Musk, he seized the opportunity. And as a result, this is, like you said, over half of the EVs sold in the world are sold in China. But the incredible thing is even half of the Teslas that are made in the world last year, 711,000 Teslas were made, and 52% of those were made in the Shanghai Gigafactory.
mm.
So, Tesla is, everybody likes to talk about, oh, I have Tesla stock. Tesla's the most amazing company. Forget all these, who's BYD? Tesla's king. Yeah, Tesla is king because of China. It's the same thing. And the most incredible thing about that is by China welcoming in Tesla in the beginning, this is how China has been able to evolve its own EV industry, because all of the Chinese EV companies have been learning from Tesla, and they have been studying Tesla, and Tesla is an integral part of that Chinese EV ecosystem. And that's
Mhm.
really about, so again, is really a brilliant move from the Chinese government, just in their foresight and going back 23 years, almost 24 years now, and saying, look, we can't compete with traditional gas engines. Let's go for EVs. Let's give the subsidies to local and foreign companies. Let's welcome in Tesla, make them an integral part of our ecosystem. Tesla is so integrated in China, it's now impossible for Tesla to leave. There's no way they could do that. And that's a huge advantage to China. Because again, same thing. Even if Tesla, continues to dominate, again, half those cars are being made in China. China's making money off of them too, and it's good for local business, and it's great. So that's the kind of back end story with Tesla. But again, just another great example of a U.S. and China relationship that is just flourishing right now.
I wanted to add to how China was able to incubate EVs. China actually built out the infrastructure for charging stations before the EV market was coming, years ahead of
True.
time.
True.
China was like, what are we going to need in order to make this successful? And so it was like, okay, well, people need to be able to drive more than 100 or 200 kilometers before charging. So they just started building state subsidized charging stations all over the entirety of China, especially, the eastern side of China where the population is heaviest. And
Right.
so when Tesla, BYD, and all these other cars companies came to the market, people were able to buy them. One of the reasons Gavin Newsom came over, governor of California, former governor, mayor of San Francisco, actually, which is really interesting because he was also at the APEC meeting,
Yeah.
is that he came over to learn from China about how to set up the infrastructure, because
Nice.
California is going to be building out, my home state, the infrastructure ahead of time now, because they want to have EVs flow into the Californian market, especially obviously domestic brands. The United
Right.
States does have, does favor its own brands whenever possible. And
Right.
this is not going to be an exception. Teslas are probably going to be able to dominate because the United States doesn't always play fair. And we could go to examples of that, but we don't really need to. But
Right.
I would like to encourage other state leaders to do this new kind of sub-national diplomacy. This is the new word for Gavin Newsom's visit, governor of California, going to
Nice.
China for diplomatic relations on a subnational level. U.S. state leaders actually consider themselves their own kind of autonomous government, some more so than others.
Yeah.
So I think that if governors from other states also want to come out to China to do their own kind of diplomatic efforts, China's probably going to welcome that. So if you're
Oh
the
yeah.
governor of Texas, if you're the governor of Arkansas or whatever, you want to come to Beijing to like do some diplomatic relations of your own, I'm certain that China is going to send, appropriate ambassadorial staff to meet you at the airport and whatnot. I wanted to ask you about something.
Yeah.
You're in the States. Yellen, you know, uh, Secretary of the Treasury, she
Correct.
came out here to China last year, and it looked like she had a good time. And then she was at the tarmac to meet Xi Jinping off the plane in San Francisco, and
Right.
she already announced that she wants to come back to China in 2024. You know quite a bit about business. In your opinion, is this about trying to get China to continue to buy U.S. treasuries?
It's definitely a big deal for the United States to keep buying those treasuries, because I think what's happening right now is, we have a very in inflated stock market right now that I think is heading towards a major correction. We've obviously are feeling the pain of just printing endless amounts of dollars. Inflation is absolutely rampant in this country right now. I know that's something you have no idea about because you have deflation in China at the moment, and things are much more reasonably priced as a result. But I mean, it is at a point right now where there's a lot of people struggling in the United States with the cost of life and the cost of living, and it is something where the rich get richer and the poor get poor, and it's this divide. This wealth gap is just widening extensively, and it is quite remarkable. So I think what we're seeing here is I definitely think that Yellen would like to see that, once all of a sudden, China's made some interesting moves. They've started to, start dumping their U.S. treasuries. They started, buying a lot more gold along with Russia. And, they're certainly, looking to expand the BRICS network. And, where they're definitely shifting to a multipolar society, which is what we live in now. We do live in a multipolar world. But I think what's important to realize is that, it was China that bailed out the United States in the 2008 financial crisis. Not many Americans know that it was China buying our, treasury bonds that really helped bail out this country. And so I think, for the United States, obviously you want to sell those bonds. You want to sell those treasury bonds, and you want to make sure that people around the world, your partners around the world, have that large trust in your government. And it is certainly a sign that trust is, maybe we don't want to hold as much as we used to. Maybe we want to start dumping some of these treasury bonds. I think China's a little bit limited. It's not like they could just clear them all out. I mean, they own so much, U.S. treasury bonds that, it'd be very difficult to offload them. Who else is going to buy that many? It would be the question. So I think I think the other answer to that, Jason, is that Yellen is not stupid. She also knows that our United States economy is directly connected to China. And so, she said, I think her quote from earlier this year, loosely quoting this, is that, the United States and China, if it were to decouple, it would be an economic disaster. And she said something along those lines, realizing that, we would cannibalize our own economy if we really were so stubborn that we wanted to cut off every tie to China. It's just not going to happen. And we would ultimately, Americans, most specifically, the American consumer would be getting the short end of that stick for sure.
Well, I kind of want to add to that a little bit, because I was
Sure.
also, I see a correction coming. I don't know if it's going to be as bad as I originally thought, because I thought it was going to come in H2 of this year, because
Right.
they're going to cut interest rates. They've announced they're going to cut
Right.
interest at least 5 to 6 times next
Right.
year, which means that they may actually soften the blow, and maybe the U.S. economy cannot, go into this grinding halt like everyone was suspecting. But I
Right.
mean, I guess my point in asking about Yellen is, if the United States wants to make sure that China buys more US treasuries, one of the things that because China has 3.5 trillion in foreign currency reserves, and
Right.
it might just invest those in the Belt and Road Initiative and other endeavors and all kinds of, Euro bonds and other things, just to diversify away from the dollar. But
Right.
it occurs to me, as an American who wants to see, China and the US get along really well, that having China own treasuries is not just in the US benefit, but it benefits both countries, because it creates, requisite ties to
Right.
maintain the peace. And so for me, looking at Yellen, I would assume that Yellen should be pressuring our political leadership to make sure that, our diplomatic efforts towards China are positive, so that in 2024, 2025, China continues to invest in some US treasuries, whether it's diversifying somewhat or not. And
Yeah.
so I would like to see our political leadership be a little bit more mature vis-a-vis our relationship with China.
And I think it's going to be very interesting here, Jason. As you know, we've got the election coming up. And so I think what you're going to see is one of the things you mentioned earlier was the fact that the left and the right are pretty much anti-China right now. There's certainly an anti-China sentiment in Washington, and it is a difficult one because, for example, Joe Biden's got to play the game, right? I mean, if he wants to get reelected, he cannot come out and have, this more of a progressive stance. For example, he can't do like a Gavin Newsom and be like, "Hey, we should learn from China. Let's go ahead and, why don't I go visit China and see how they built this infrastructure? I think that'd be good for America." You say that, good luck. You're going to lose the election. So you've got to, that's the major thing that people need to understand. You got to play the game. So Biden's not stupid. I mean, he's going to play that game, and but that's what's also interesting. Let's imagine that he does win a second term and he locks that in. Well, obviously the first question is, can he make it all 4 years? I mean, or what's going to happen for the Democrats there? But the interesting thing in theory would be is once you lock up that second term, that's kind of when American presidents can kind of do their thing, because when you win your first term, you're first spending the first year and a half trying to get your bearings. Maybe you do work for a year and a half, but then all of a sudden you're basically just trying to get reelected. And then after you get that second term, that's when you can kind of, it doesn't matter. You can say whatever you want to say. You're kind of guaranteed to finish out your terms. And that's when you start to see politicians be a little bit more truthful, because they don't have to play reelection. You're out. You're a limited time in America. You can only do a maximum of 8 years as president. So that's the interesting thing about this system, is that so much of it is playing the game, playing word games, and really knowing what to say and how to say it, and appealing to get that almighty vote. And that's really all that matters.
I'm actually really concerned about the election because I think, there'll be a who can bash China the most competition among some of the members who are going to be running, some of the potential candidates. But I wanted to actually talk about investing in China really quickly. There has been even amongst some of the giant media organizations who cover economics, and I'm not going to call them out by name, there's been a lot of down talk about China. And I wanted to put some context on that because I don't
Sure.
think that it's fair. Because the IMF, for example, at the beginning of the year, around January, February, put expected GDP growth for China to be about 5%. And they have since, moved that up to 5.4% anticipated GDP growth for China during the
Right.
year 2023. I want to put that into context. Even though GDP figures as a percentage of the size of China's economy growing in previous years have been slightly higher, it's because China's economy is so large now that those percentages go down. This year,
Right.
China is adding 1.5 trillion USD to its total GDP. Last year, China added, guess what? $1.5 trillion. The year before,
Right.
$1.5 trillion. The year before, $1.5 trillion. It's been pretty consistent, the amount that of actual GDP growth that China has been having. But each time China's economy becomes larger, the percentage that it grows of China's economy is reduced slightly because China's economy is simply so enormously large now. So I think that when people say things like, oh, China's economy is slowing down, it's actually not. It's actually just continuing at almost the exact same pace. What's slowing down is if you look at the percentage and you see, oh, this is the percentage, it seems to be going down. It's still growing by a
Right.
lot, but it's just growing as a smaller percentage of the total size of China's population. I also
Right.
wanted to talk about something, in the United States, and starting from the 1970s, there was already offshoring. 1980s and 90s, it accelerated. I lived in a town, Oakdale, where Hershey left, and Hershey moved to Mexico. So I know what offshoring is all about personally, and I
Right.
saw the effect that it had on a U.S. town, Oakdale, California. However, what's interesting about China is it doesn't have to offshore. It can reshore to itself because the western half of China is still in need of economic development. So a lot of
Right.
factories that were operating in Guangdong, they're not just moving to Bangladesh. No offense. I mean, lots of stuff is moving to Bangladesh, like
Yeah.
t-shirts, textiles, and stuff. But a lot of Chinese manufacturing is just moving to the west of China, to
Right.
Gansu and to Qinghai and all these other places in the west of China that still have low but qualified labor force that
Right.
can continue to add. So, realistically, China is a great place to invest. I actually read that the Shanghai Composite Index grows by about 10% a year and has regularly for a decade. So I
Yeah.
think that might even beat, Nasdaq actually. So if you want to invest in index funds in Shanghai, it's probably better in the long term than investing in the US. I'm not saying anything bad about the US economy. I think the US economy is actually pretty amazing, really.
It,
I think
it
there
it is
are problems in wealth distribution, but the
for
US
sure.
economy is actually quite strong. Yeah, in my
I mean,
opinion.
yeah, I would agree with that, and I mean, and the wealth distribution, I mean, that is just this result of this kind of endless capitalism, and that is just a very big difference, is because, for example, I mean, that even goes down to a cultural difference, in America, and obviously in China you have a socialist society where certainly the government is wanting to promote more of those socialism fundamentals where, for example, if the tide is rising, then you want to have all boats rise, whether it's a yacht or a small boat, so a rich or poor, everybody's boat should be rising. And that's a concept that's very foreign in the United States. In the United States, our concept very much is, if you will go work hard, you can achieve success. And so it very tends to be about the individual. In the United States, it's not about the collective society. It's not about rising all the boats. It's, how do I get my boat to rise faster than anybody else's? And
Mhm.
so that's why you see these extreme wealth, and there's a ton of wealth here in the United States, and there's also a ton of poverty. And that's why that wealth gap is so different. And it even goes down to things like universal health care, right? In Canada, for example, a country that I lived in for 5 years, every Canadian has health care. It's considered a human right, and every Canadian, you don't go into medical debt because you can't afford to go to the hospital, right? That's a right in Canada that you have that right to do that. In America, it's a very different concept. It's, why do I need to pay for your medical insurance? I have nothing to do with you, right? You're on your own. So it's just a little bit of like, also, that's why I always say there's a lot of cultural elements as well when we're analyzing these geopolitics. And certainly China, much more collective society, much more of a socialist society in practice. So those are some important perspectives to understand.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I wanted to ask you, I guess this would be kind of like the pinnacle of the show, is would you suggest to other Americans, to American companies, to find ways to invest in China?
I think what's really the short answer to that is yes, and the main reason for that is this is that I love Warren Buffett, and one of his famous quotes is that when others become fearful, it's time for you to become greedy, and when others get greedy, it's time for you to be fearful. And so I think that's a really powerful quote. It's obviously a very good one for investing. Obviously, when everybody's saying, "Oh my gosh, look at how much money I'm making in the stock market. Let's all buy, 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 buy." Yeah, it's probably a good time to start taking some profits, or be cautious moving forward, because you've reached that point of, obviously, the stocks are appreciated so much already. How much more can it go before it kind of levels off or even declines a bit? So I think with China, there's obviously a great opportunity still. I mean, I think that's where you're looking at these United States companies. Again, something like we opened the show with, something like a Starbucks, where it's like, what other market is Starbucks opening up 3,000 new stores? Right? I mean, it's not the United States. I mean, we've basically capitalized on the market here, right? Starbucks is very profitable here, but I mean, how many more can we open up another 3,000 Starbucks in America? Probably not. China, absolutely, and it's going to happen. And as you know, I think you're very, as you know, like China's already. I think I mean, it's one of the fastest growing coffee regions in the world, like coffee drinking countries in the world. I mean,
A lot
Chinese
of people
people.
thought Luckin was going to go under at 4,000 stores because of the problems that they had in the United States. However, now they're at 10,000 stores in China.
Yeah, and then that's been a great bounce back story. I mean, they had some financial problems. They had a big scandal going on. The stock went all the way down to, I don't know what it went down to. I mean, it was basically down
No,
to pennies.
they fired
Um,
their entire senior staff and started.
yeah, absolutely. Had a huge scandal. So I mean, that was just really quite amazing. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the short end is, I think, Jason, is I would always be looking at China, and never underestimate China. I think that's the one thing that I've learned in living there for many years, doing business for many years, is China always seems to surprise, and it's I would never count them out. It's the same thing if one of the things that we've seen is the United States trying to sanction and really cut off China's access to technology. Well, that just makes China work harder and innovate faster.
Yeah.
That's the
Apparently, we have a
simple.
Kirin 5nm chip now. That's a
I've
few days
heard
ago.
that. I mean,
Wow.
so I mean, that's the amazing thing is, again, you force China into a corner, then you're just forcing China to innovate. Do you really want to bet against Chinese people innovating? I
Right.
mean, they've had a pretty good track record. I mean, you can go to China yourself and look at, how advanced and much more modern and sophisticated, China is compared to the United States. I'm just talking infrastructure in cities and how cities are built and how they function. It's amazing. I mean, it really is. And I know any American or foreigner, for that matter, that goes there and really sees that firsthand, they're impressed. It's truly incredible.
Thank you so much for your time, Cyrus. I hope that we can get together in maybe a few months again.
Absolutely.